a part of Attribution Time. I appreciate you being on today. I'm excited to dive in. I think we have a really neat approach to how we're going to talk about attribution. Um, and the first piece that we wanted to really kind of cover was what's the end all goal, which I think is great because so often I jump into these and I think about like just how do you do attribution? What, this and that. And we don't talk about like, well, what's the end goal? Like why are people even just doing it? So let's unpack that a bit.
Absolutely. I like to tell people that I build GTM infrastructure that provides full funnel transparency. And I hope that answers your question in the sense that, like, well, what is full funnel transparency? Well, it's about having that end model that you can understand the forecast. You can optimize your marketing mix, your marketing spend, so that you're getting what ideally should be the best possible outcome for you and your customers, right?
Mm.
And a lot of infrastructure goes into that. So I always ask people, well, what are we really solving for? Are you trying to optimize for acquisition revenue, total revenue, pipeline opportunities? What would that dashboard really look like to you? Are you kind of looking for an input-output model? And then I want to work backwards from that so that I can set up the data capture appropriately. So I can build the data warehouse that would support these models. And a lot of people, for various reasons, right, especially startups, kind of jump into that, like, we need attribution. And to me, attribution is really, that's the data capture part. We're capturing the responses and all the information about that response. Who, what, when, where, and how. What offer did they respond to? When did it happen? How do we associate people? And that's all important. But if you start there, what typically happens is you start building a model at the same time.
Yeah.
And then invariably the model's missing data. And you're like, oh, well, we didn't know you wanted that. So now we missed 6 months of that data set. We got to go build something now, which is harder because we're not starting from scratch. And we won't really have that visibility for 3 more months.
Yeah.
Right.
So let's say, like, with that, would you say let's use one example. So let's say I'm building a data model. I'm a marketing team, and I want to do attribution, but really my primary goal is opportunity creation and pipeline. Like that's what I'm held responsible for. So with that, like, what are some of the things as you think about the go-to-market motion, as you think about attribution, what are some of those things that you're processing through with the client?
Well, that outcome is really how we're going to build that model, but at the same time, I still need to capture that data. So when someone says I want to optimize for pipe, I'm like, okay, well, when do we decide that there's pipe, right? And we just got to tease out that whole workflow to say, okay, we know it's stage 2 opportunity and it has to have a certain dollar amount or a certain estimated probability. And how do we get that probability? Is it the salesperson kind of thinking through it? Is there a model that goes into that? It doesn't have to be super specific necessarily, but some people have trouble with say $0 opportunities, right? Everybody who has a free trial or even comes in automatically gets an opportunity, so we can just track something.
Yeah, that's good.
But if all those people, 50% of your ops are actually $0, what does that tell you anything? Do you want to optimize for total ops, or you actually want to optimize for actual pipeline? So you just kind of have to understand that and make sure that your data structures and the workflow that people are expected to follow matches up. And I don't want to say that's super easy, but if you get everyone in a workshop and you just kind of walk through the high level process steps and the outcomes, you do get there eventually.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, that's such a good point. That something we often talk about when we think about attribution. Like, you need to break attribution. Isn't just this. You even mentioned it when we talk about data. It's not as like we get every single data point and we just run it. It's like, you got to think through what are the different sales motions, what are the different business processes, who's all involved, because there's different within each different type of deal that you have within a single business. Those are handled and processed differently, right? And so the way that in which you're going to collect data against those is going to be different, and how you approach all that's going to be different as well. So I think that's an interesting point.
Yeah. And, a lot of people kind of, well, not a lot of people, but, B2C, B2B commerce are kind of a little bit different from each other in the sense that,
Sure.
B2C and e-com, you can in many ways show that a campaign had direct causation, right? Now,
Right.
there's some nuances about that. It's not 100% of your sales, but you can say, someone clicked on it and they went to buy something. Um, in B2B, that's not typical unless maybe you have a freemium model and it's a certain price point. But um, no single response or action is going to cause a sale, but it's going to be correlated, right? And that's a distinction in statistics that most people forget about. And there are two kind of models you want to look at, and you may be able to build those based on the data that you capture, right? One is what I kind of call the account probability model. And if you remember back in the day, Marketo, and I think Demand Base also does this, is you can see the chart of all the different responses, not touches, responses that people within an account had before there was an opportunity and during an opportunity and then a closed won sale. And Mercado actually just posted a recipe about how could you extract some of that data and show that path. And that's kind of cool, but it's a one-to-one account. It's not an aggregate, right? So all it shows me is like that's the path for an account. That's
Yeah.
not very helpful, actually. What I always wanted it to do, and what I don't think I've ever really seen anyone do successfully, is show me of all the 10,000 accounts we have that had a closed won opportunity, whether it's upsell or not. What was the most likely set of responses that happened before a closed won sale, right?
Yeah.
So if every successful sale has webinar, a form fill, a contact us, a white paper, and 72% of those deals happen with those three things in it, that's helpful to know, because then maybe I can adjust how I handle certain situations. Maybe I adjust my MQL or MQA thresholds. Maybe I double down on those three items or those three activities to try to drive people to do a white paper or contact us, et cetera. Now, you do risk a situation where you kind of create a self-fulfilling prophecy if you're only spending money to drive people to those three things. And of
That's
course,
right.
100% of your revenue is coming from that.
To say like a contact us, if that is the beginning of every single deal process, it kind of, like to your point, is a self-fulfilling prophecy there.
Right.
It's like that's just
And there could be situations where that happens, and
sure.
that's why it is important to have set aside a certain amount of money to experiment and move with the market as channels and content change.
Yep.
And I would, in very rare circumstances, would I really expect that extreme example to happen. But that can give you an idea of like, okay, well, I don't want to send accounts that don't have this to a salesperson,
Yeah.
right? And you could do that analysis too. It's like close loss deals always had, the dummies guide. Like people got what they wanted and they never came back. That could be true.
Yeah.
But again, that's correlation. It's not going to say definitely, right? So I would be, it's helpful. But then the other part people really want is some sort of actual budget model.
Yeah.
And that's where you really need to get to, right? $1 in is going to yield $4 out. And then how do you manage that across the different channels you have access to?
Yeah. ROI is a big metric no matter what, right?
Right. And can you forecast that out? Do you have enough data to do that? What's that marginal impact of maybe shifting some money around and looking at, lifetime value to CAC, whatever metric you want, and keeping in mind that kind of sophistication typically takes time.
Yeah.
You got to build out the data. You got to get used to using a certain model. You have to ask certain questions, and you might take 18 to 36 months. Most executives won't let you do that, but
Yeah.
That may be necessary to get to the right or the best possible set of data to do forecasting.
Yeah. So we got. I think we're on like we've really kind of alluded to it, this build versus buy process. And I think this is a good segue there because you're right. I mean, when you build it, it's going to take a lot of time. But even when you buy products, it takes a lot of time because the data has to aggregate, the data has to mature, like, and I tell everyone, like, a good barometer, if you were to buy a product, it would be, how long the deal cycle is, and like, that's going to be, the minimum amount of time you need to understand, or at least start getting some meaningful insight from the data, right? You can't just plug in and have all this meaningful insight. You have to allow deals to mature, close, process through. And so, like, if we talk about that in a B2B space, that's 6, 9, 8, 12, 18 months, right? Depending on how big of a business and what those deals look like. And but even on the build side, that takes a lot of time because when you buy a system, it tells you every single data point that you have to have because you bought the system, has that kind of preset. When you build the system, you get to choose all those data points, but you might miss one, or so there's flexibility in that. There's good stuff in that. But like, I'm sure you've built your own in the past as you've worked through different companies, and or are an expert in the Marketo space. But what's your thoughts on build versus buy?
Well, for marketing mix modeling, attribution, data capture, I think it's kind of depends on your goals and how much money you want to spend. Um, the offer channel data capture, and this is, I think, what a lot of people think of when they think of an attribution model, is they just want to capture the data. And there are tools that you can buy to help you do that, and they will use cookies or plug into existing objects in your system. They'll handle some amount of data stamping and managing stages, or at least they should. But some of them are kind of limited in the sense that you can't kind of add objects. You're limited to their kind of data thinking.
Yeah.
And that would be good enough for most situations. Maybe it's not. But you can do the offer channel method using your own custom object. You already have cookies from, say, your marketing automation platform, or even custom cookies, as well as your own application data that maybe if you have a product like that. And if you're feeding that into a data warehouse and you have the engineers who can dedicate some time to build out the data associations and the linkages, you probably would spend as much or less potentially money on building it. Now, the big question is the maintenance. Right? The big benefit of the cloud is someone else is doing a lot of that maintenance work and the evolution of the product. Of course, hopefully the product goes in the direction you want it to go in. But then you can capture the data either way, build or buy. The question is, do you want to maintain that infrastructure yourself or not, or do you want to have someone else do it? And I think given the importance many companies who are doing it well place on this, you're going to need some engineer to help maintain that infrastructure, whether you build it or you buy it, right? Same problem we had with marketing automation 10 years ago is suddenly everyone realized, well, you actually need someone who's really good at this kind of stuff to maintain it. Can't just have a demand gen marketer do it, especially as you grow, because it becomes increasingly specialized. So you do have to compare it, and I have done that with vendors in the past. And the question I had before me was really more of a switch conversation, right? If I spend X dollars to switch, I'm still going to need some of those people I already have who are maintaining the system to make the switch and then to maintain it. So did I really save any money? Maybe it helps me rip out code from one system and I don't have to worry about it as much. That's a benefit, right?
Yeah.
It gets a very complicated question very quickly. Now, the nice thing about buying is that other than maintaining the infrastructure, they also provide these kind of pre-built models. Typically, it's last touch, first touch, equal weighting, W, whatever it is, the kind of standard, easy to do models, which, is nice because you don't have to go hire a data analyst or a data engineer or a data scientist to try to do something for you.
Yeah.
The nice thing about having a data scientist is they'll build you the model you want, which may or may not be significantly different from something that you bought from someone. So when you have to explore these vendors, maybe you need a data capture vendor, and maybe you need a model vendor, or someone to help you build that model, and then you can maintain it.
Yeah.
Um, so
Yeah,
I
I'm
think
always
it's
curious
always
about
clear cut.
modeling because, like, Marketo Measure, for example, like you
Mhm.
said, out of the box ones, first touch, last touch, or first touch lead creation. You could do equal weighting if you wanted. It has its own like full path modeling where it distributes, but it also offers like a custom model involved in that. And as I've worked with clients who like now have this idea of like custom modeling, so they don't have to like get a data engineer to like write the code to have this process or anything like that. Um, they spend so much time. Talk about time, like we talked about earlier, like all this time is spent on this custom model, and it's like kind of goes back to the very first thing we talked about. What's the goal? Like what do you and it's a really nice to have, but like if we don't start with the goal of what you're trying to accomplish, where W-shaped modeling, which is that first touch, those middle kind of the middle engagement and the opportunity creation, and what led to that, what's the pipeline in that, what's all that, that honestly answers most of the questions for most clients that are getting into attribution, because they're marketers that need to create opportunities that generate pipeline and need to understand what channels or campaigns or marketing efforts are effective in this process. But then
Mhm.
they see that custom modeling and they get so like excited about that. It's like, is that really where you need it, or is it more the insights from the data that you're getting, right? I think there's a
Right.
lot of insights there that you know are far more powerful than just trying to build this custom weighting. So that's my tangent on custom modeling. I think it's one of those things that's really nice to have, but I also often wonder, is it really a must have when, rather than focusing on the data points that you're collecting, as you touched on, like that is attribution kind of begins with the data, which you can collect, how to be able to like process that data, interpret that data.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. I think, a long time ago, I wrote about kind of MarTech maturity, and this predictive modeling and funnel was really the end stage, because you have to do
Mhm.
so many things to reach that point.
Right.
And most teams or companies lose interest before they reach that stage,
Yeah.
whether they bought it or built it or tried anything, right? And maintaining that energy behind that project is really important. I think you get a lot of companies would be happy with any sort of model, right? You just
Yeah.
pick the out of the box model, but that's a weighting model, and that's probably good enough as an early stage predictive situation or just full funnel visibility. But what do you do when you bring in content into it? What do you do when you start asking more interesting questions to optimize spend or deal with certain scenarios that maybe, as your business matures, maybe you didn't ask before? And is getting to that level of resolution or that level of forecasting accuracy worth it? Maybe. Depends on the volume of your business, the volume of your data. You're going to spend, whether you buy someone or an agency to help you do it, or you have someone internally, that they have to spend time away from maintaining to start building some things out. And it could take time to build that out. It could be difficult to build out a true multivariate model that actually is valid for your business or your situation.
Yeah.
And there's so many factors that could go into something like that, where somewhere else someone changes the pricing and packaging on you, so now your
Sure.
model is completely useless, or it completely
Yeah.
throws it off because you were making a certain assumptions
Yeah.
about
What do you
things.
mean, Josh? Businesses change their approach to how to sell things? That's fascinating.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, there's constant change, and like nothing
Yeah.
will ever be 100% perfect. And if you're working with people who understand that and are okay with a certain level of, I don't want to say error rate, but you know, you don't have 100% perfect information.
Yep.
So what's that tolerance of accuracy? And ideally, as you mature in your usage of it, yeah, that tolerance should get, plus or minus 5%. Sometimes people want plus or minus 1%, but that requires, work, people. data
Absolutely.
collection
Yeah.
system.
AI is not going to solve that, right? Like you have to have the infrastructure that's in place and the maturity that's in place for
Yeah.
you to understand that. Like I think AI can help with that. Like say like it at some point, but again, you have to have all this mature data for it to even run against. But then to say, okay, yeah, you know what, let's adjust this. Let's pivot against that. And but that even we speak of time, it takes time for these AI or machine learning to process the data. And then, to your point, like the business changes how it's selling everything. Well, your data model that you've processed against is now changing. And you could use some of those insights to help you make a change for the better with the new sales approach. But now it's going to have to run against this whole new motion and all these data points of sales activities, website engagement, because you might revamp all your material on your site for the new product offering or whatever it may be. And so it's
Mhm.
ever evolving, and it's not just going to be solved through the upcoming technology of today. Like you have to be really sound in your data.
Uh, well, certainly, whatever you do, the data quality matters. The volume of data
Sure.
matters. AI is already helpful in the sense that you could start to ask more natural language questions, which
Mhm.
could reduce that issue around, random questions you get from executives about a certain um, nuanced question that might be important, or it may just be, hey, I had a thought about it. I just like to see what happens.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
That's where someone could just go in themselves and ask the data, like, what do you guys see? That's where initially it's going to be helpful, and
Hmm.
with large scale data sets that only some companies really have, you could get to a situation where you could have a more generative journey, where it really understands the most likely pathways to accomplishing a sale in a much more dynamic sense than you could achieve by building your own statistical model. But again, this is what I think a lot of people don't talk about, though, is probability.
Hmm.
It's hard, but what's the most likely set of actions to drive that revenue,
Yeah.
right? 'Cause, like, especially in B2B, where it's just so many people, so many variables could be involved.
Yeah. Yeah. It's not as clear cut as in the BDC. Within the BDC world, there's a lot less. Well, let's talk. The last thing we'll talk on is touch points. I was about to use the T word, and I know that's not how you want to approach that conversation. Tell me your thoughts on touch points and how you approach those conversations.
Well, I'm probably not going to change every marketer's thought about it, but when I think of touch, I think I'm going to tap you on the shoulder. I'm going to ask you if you'd like to buy something. And you're either going to say yes, which is probably very unlikely, or you're going to run away, right? Just like
Sure.
someone would on the street.
Yeah.
And what you're really capturing in the attribution data, what you're really seeing as a marketer is who is responding to that. Where did they respond? Who, what, when, where, why? Can we capture enough of that information um, on what they responded to within that channel, within that offer, the timestamp, where we thought they were in the buying process, um, to understand what's most likely going to work, right?
Mhm.
And what you can call it multi-touch if you want, but it's really about multi-response because you're only looking at the 1% of people who actually responded,
Yeah.
right? In most cases. Because there's a lot of talk recently about in market, which I think is a good point, right? Maybe only 5%, 10% of the people might be in market at any one point. They're
Hmm.
more likely to respond to you. So if you can focus your marketing dollars there, but how do you do that, right? And there's
Yeah.
intent data and all sorts of ways to do that, but to improve upon just blind luck. So it would always be better to say this is a response model, not
Hmm.
a touch. Like you can look at the whole touches. You can send out 10,000 emails, 10,000 ad impressions, and that you kind of already do that on a tactical level, right?
Yeah.
1% click through rates, 1% ad response rates, whatever your form fill rate is. Um, so it's kind of almost already built in. So just it's better to call it a response
I like it.
or
I
more
like it.
accurate to call it a
It
response.
is. It is more accurate. You're right. And I'm curious if that will change some marketers' thoughts. But I think it's a good approach because we have to be careful when anytime you go into a conversation about attribution. we talk about, well, is it influence? Is it, you know, driving pipeline? Are you, what's the right word to say there? Or do, I own this, or I'm crediting this. And the same thing with touch points or response. Like, those are the words that we got to be cautious of as we have these conversations, because people already are a little bit cautious when you talk about attribution, because so often people just assume you're taking marketing's going to take credit from sales and this and that, and that's
Oh,
not
that whole
that's not the goal,
conversation.
right? You know.
No, and that's again going back to the beginning of the conversation, right? Because sales and marketing, are they aligned? Do they agree that they're going to speak the same language and look at the same reports and the same data? And if people are still thinking marketing stealing something from me, then that's not a great sign.
Yeah, right. That's right. Exactly. No, this is good. Josh, thanks so much for being a part of Attribution Time. I know a lot of people will get a lot from this conversation. Appreciate it.
Glad to be here. Thanks again.